Hey church, let's talk about 2 Timothy chapter 4. I think this chapter is really interesting because it puts up next to each other two very different, but I think parallel problems. Paul is closing out with a charge to Timothy specifically. He's talking to Timothy, who's called to be an evangelist, and so he's saying, be ready to preach, stand firm in the truth, always be teaching, always be preaching. But then in verse 9, he pivots, and he starts talking about, come see me soon. Here's kind of a report on the guys we've been working with, our buddies in the ministry. He says in verse 13, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus, also the books, and above all the parchments. He's got all these really kind of technical, physical base needs that he's trying to deal with in this letter. So these two things are juxtaposed next to each other. This high, strong admonition for spiritual strength, theological truth, preaching, evangelism, next to don't forget my coat and that sheaf of parchment that I need to keep writing on. And I just wanted to draw attention to that and say, following Jesus is not just something that happens on Sunday mornings, or not just something that happens in the language of the King James Version. Your prayers are not just going to sound like the book of Psalms all the time. It happens in the midst of regular life. Sometimes it happens in very strong spiritual terms. Sometimes you're going to be really hard focused on spiritual warfare or theological truth, and you may be clinging really closely to a verse that you've got memorized to help you overcome sin, or to deal with a brother or sister who's wandering away and into sin. They need to be drawn back. But then there are just going to be days where you're tired, or the kids have been out of hand, or the money's not quite covering all the bills, and there's just these real practical issues. And God wants to have a hand in all those things. It's all a part of the same thing. It's not like we've got two different lives that aren't meant to be together. God intends for his hand to be on all of those things. And so don't ever let those things get separated in your head. Look for God in the mundane. And don't get overwhelmed by the specialness of those serious, high theological moments. God intends for you to be well-versed and able and equipped for all of that. And his Spirit is going to walk with you no matter what the circumstances. He never leaves you behind or carries you and then drops you. So just keep that in mind as you pray and as you go today.